Hey, welcome to the show. And today I have a special guest, Lorne Lanning. Now, today's episode will be a lot longer than our typical episodes because Lorne is one of those creative minds that has so much valuable insight and experience. I just could not cut the episode short. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Creative Trek, episode 12.
All right. Let's get started.
It's time to go behind the minds of today's top creative professionals and leaders to uncover the secrets to creativity and discover the true strategy you need to thrive in the marketplace. Creative Trek is the show designed to help you make your mark. Now here's your host, Sean O'Daniels.
Hey, welcome to Creative Trek, and today I have a special guest for you, Lorne Lanning. Lorne is a game designer, director, writer, and creative entrepreneur. Mostly known for co-founding Oddworld Inhabitants in 1994, he has sold over 7 million games to date. Originally trained in illustration and traditional animation, Lorne has a passion for pursuing opportunities where artistic expression, technology, and modern myth-making collide. So Lorne, welcome to the show, and tell our guests a little bit more about you and what you do.
Hey, great to be here, Sean. Thanks for having me. Well, I think people that do know me as a game designer primarily. I founded Oddworld Inhabitants with my partner Sharon McKenna back in the mid '90s. For people that don't know me, I guess my career really started as an artist, and kind of as a poor kid growing up, afraid I'd be homeless, and I grew up in New England, which is cold winters, right? So, the possibility of being out on the street just always seemed a pretty close possibility for me as a destiny, and that made me try to figure out how to combine the only thing that I really at the time saw going for me as a kid, approaching college age, which was art. And how do I use art to stay alive in the world and survive, and at the same time, really appease this artistic passion that I have. And a lot of that was driven by wanting to sort of change the world, spending a lot of time in nature, seeing a lot of it destroyed. Had a lot of impacts like that on how I viewed the world, and I wanted to start making content. And I went to art school in New York, and I went to animation school in LA, and I started focusing on how do I create stories and properties out of a medium that I loved. And at the time, it wasn't games, it was computer graphics. This is back, you got to go back to the mid 80s. And it was this new, if you were a painter and you started seeing computer graphics and 3D happening, it was like this whole wild world of discovery opening up. And so I dove fully into that world, trying to find, where someday can I create my IP? Can I create my stories? So really, I've always been a wannabe storyteller. And where I've had success and failures and hardship and victories in that has largely pervaded into the game industry, because I kind of saw that coming. I saw that games was going to be a place where people like myself, which is basically artists with high-tech tools, would have opportunities to start creating those properties, hopefully like that I had always loved, whether it be Star Wars by Lucas or Walt Disney, his characters, or Hanna-Barbera or Dr. Seuss. These were people that, to me as a kid growing up, Jim Henson with the Muppets, these were things that inspired me greatly and wanted me to get more creative, and wanted me to birth things like that, and wanted me to talk about the personal issues I saw in the world, reflected in properties. And ultimately, I saw that place in games. So that's where I wound up landing, starting Oddworld back about 20 years ago. And I've kind of been in that space ever since, with its ups and downs, seen a lot of changes. And so that's what I am. I'm kind of a wannabe storyteller who's always been searching for the vehicle. That's the truth of it. And as I consider it, modern myth making. That's kind of my goal.
Wow. Well, that's quite a goal, man, and I applaud you for it.
Oh, thanks.
I think a lot of our listeners, if they don't play games, Oddworld was one of the top-selling console games for how many years? I mean, I remember it's up there. It's a classic.
I think we definitely got the classic status, and that helped us a lot. There's certainly guys that sold a lot more games, and I envy them. But to date, I think we've sold over 7 million games,
Wow.
and that's been great. But it hasn't been easy, and at different times they cost a lot more money. So there's a really interesting dance that I think faces creatives today, which is, we used to have the idea that the artist is something that's, the guy cutting his ear off, right? He's so passionate and he's alone in the corner, wallowing in his concerns for the world, and he comes out with some brilliant painting or something. But in actuality, as time goes on, the artist has to, in my opinion, sort of s- take a stand up and stop just uh, I should say, integrate more into what the world is, into the technology of the world, the systems of business, the marketplaces. Try and figure out how to work those systems as part of your art form. And that's a huge challenge, and that really means artists more as entrepreneur. And today with the web, everyone can have their own website. People can have distribution networks for prints, whether you're a 2D artist, a 3D artist, or a game maker. It's becoming possible to actually reach audience. And that's something that has only really emerged in the last decade or two. It's just been blossoming. But before that, you used to have to go through these big distribution channels. You had to really be entrenched in another level of sort of business and commerce and machinery of a company to actually find people that would pay for things that you make as an entertainment medium. And today that's changed drastically. So it's sort of that role of embodying you as a creative and turning that a little more into mechanically responsible creative.
Yeah.
Like you have to pay attention to more things. You got to get along with wider ranges of people. You have to work efficiently with larger teams at times. This is a whole different synergy than the guy who just sits behind his desk and paints.
Right. Right.
And these are, I call them, grow up moments for us. It's like I'd rather be the guy sitting behind the desk and painting, but I'm not going to achieve everything I wanted that way. So most of the things I learn, I think I learned the hard way. I learned the painful way. I could have been smarter about. We didn't get to go to Stanford. Like I was saying, I went to art school, right? But the entrepreneur in the artist today has never had greater opportunity, and at the same time, there's never been less stability in the workplaces. So, what do they say? Necessity is the mother of all invention.
Right.
And so this is kind of where we are. And I think for a lot of people, I do get a lot of people reach out and they say that our path, has sort of inspired them, got them started on their career, inspired them with whether it was the early games, the books with the production designs, the character designs they were seeing, or the stories. That part has been really rewarding because that's a lot of the reason why you do it in the first place. I mean, it doesn't pay the bills, but as a creative, it's not just about making money. You want to move audiences, and then I think the different degrees of that is to what end? To what end are you trying to move an audience? Are you just moving them towards your price point, or are you actually trying to? When I saw Star Wars, it was like a new religion. When I heard Yoda's rap on nature, I was like, yes, that's what I'm missing from, the institutional religions that people are trying to,
Right.
force on us. So I think for artists, for creatives, there's a lot of opportunity, but we have to take on more than we want to. And there's a
Right.
huge discipline in that.
Right. Yeah. Too many artists out there think their only canvas is that stretch canvas in front of them, or really the world is your canvas, and
Yeah,
there's
it is.
there's a lot more hats you have to wear today, and I think artists are slowly realizing it. But I think on the downside is culture still isn't, and society isn't recognizing it. They call somebody who's really good at a craft as talented, but talent is not just measured by a craft.
Right.
And yeah, so I think it'll take some time. Artists are slowly picking up on it. That's one of the reasons why I started the show. Working in the game industry my entire career, I've worked with some of the most talented, amazing, inspiring people, and it's a shame because most of them go unknown. They work behind the scenes. They're in the studios, and this is kind of their platform I want to give them.
Oh,
And
that's great.
yeah, and you're right. Today we have so many other platforms out there in front of us to share our work and start businesses and be more entrepreneurial.
Mhm.
Yeah, very well said. So,
Thanks.
Lauren, I want to dive right in. Right off the bat, we like to ask a favorite quote or mantra you have. Something to get the show going.
Sure.
Do you have something like that?
I do. It's embarrassingly simple, and I heard it. This is again in the mid '80s, and not to belabor it, but if you remember in the mid 80s, Japan was the big emerging economic force.
Yes.
Japan was, today it's China. Everyone's like, you got to get into China and India. Well, in the 80s, it was Japan. It's
Yeah.
Japan's going to rule tomorrow. And and so I was watching and reading biographies of successful Japanese guys. And one time I saw an interview with the guy who was, at this time, he was the richest man in Japan, and he was a hotel. He was in real estate. He was a developer, and he owned hotels. He was very non-traditional in the way he did business. And they asked him in the interview, "What's the secret to your success?" And his answer was, "Think big." And, and if there's one quote that I've always gone back to, is "Think big." And that had so much different meaning to me at different times, and a lot of it had to deal with your own fears. We live and we think in limited ways that people have helped shape the box that we see ourselves in. And so whether it's your family who thought you should always stick around, this neck of the woods, or how you're being viewed in your current role in an industry, and you feel like you'll never be able to escape out of it. I don't know about you, but every role I had, I felt like I was doomed to be in that role forever. And so that idea of thinking big to me was like, I would walk out at 2 a.m. in the morning after having arrived at 10 a.m., a 14-hour day or something. And I'd be walking like wondering if all this is worth it, like night after night, week after week, year after year. And I'd like look up in the moon and I'd be like, think big, think big. And I'd be like, well, I am thinking big. It doesn't mean I've hit my marks, but as long as I keep shooting for that moon, I'm going to land somewhere in between. But if I don't, I'm not going to land closer at all. At least that was my perception.
Right.
And then I've met people that are ultra successful, and they'd be like, "Yeah, I never planned any of it." I'm like, "I hate you." But yeah.
Yo, I mean, all of us have that resistance in us, like where we ask ourselves, well, who am I? That's the first question that pops in my head. And if I really start thinking big, then I get this like slap of correction reality going, whoa, whoa, wait, hold on. Who are you to do that? Who are
Big
you?
time.
And
Big time.
have you read the book by Stephen Pressfield called The War of Art?
I've heard of it, and I've been told I should read it, but I haven't.
Yeah, great book. He dives really deep into that whole conversation that runs through everybody's mind on, who are you to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's something, and this is, I guess, kind of a warning that I think young people will hit, really passionate, creative, hardworking people will hit, which is a lot of the biggest obstacles I had were all shaped by my own mind, and they were myself. And those, like you said, that slap down of wake up, I having come from, we didn't have a lot of money. It was a military family. They didn't really plan economically or anything like that. So, there was no trust fund. That was never going to happen, But when it made you sort of, if you've people that rise in careers in industries, but that came from very, very, very humble beginnings, they tend to have sort of like a lot of scar tissue, because they've fought against the world to get where they were, or at least to get above the tipping point. Because no one believed in them, and no one, there's so many people that no one believed in, so they had to believe in themselves, and then they developed much more defensive attitudes. And this was a handicap of mine earlier, is that although I was going for the world, I had no idea how sort of defensive and protective my attitudes were around my ideas or my craft. And that took a long time to figure out that many, many times the biggest obstacle is you.
Yeah.
And the limitations you're setting on yourself, you're setting them your own, and you're convinced that the rest of the world has frameworked you this way, right? You're just convinced of it. And oddly enough, as an employer, because I've been managing for over 30 years and then employing, speak about art forms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Management is a craft and serious art form, never to be underestimated, as you were pointing out. But when you look at that fight and in 20 years of employing people, how often now I see this in the young people that oftentimes have the most potential is they're just encrusted with this sort of, I consider it scar tissue of just having gotten there in the first place. And now it's like, okay, well, now it's time to shed that skin, right? It might have gotten you here, but it's kind of like adrenaline and, fight or flight right? So you fought because you had to, and now you survived. That's good. But if you don't learn how to balance that in a way of things, you're just going to keep on fighting, and now it's a harmful toxicity.
Yep.
And I see this all the time, and usually it's with it often, I mean, everyone has the trait, but it often comes with the really talented people with the really big possibilities. And this is the area where I feel grateful today, is because uh, one thing we're always fighting for is credibility, right? Through our whole careers. I can speak to that. You can speak to that. Anyone who's in the workplace can speak to. I don't have the credibility I deserve, and so you think that you're not being taken seriously. The thing that I'm really lucky for today is that my career has been fairly visible. We have distributed things across the globe. A lot of people do look up to us in different ways, and because of that, if I'm talking to someone young who's going through these problems and they feel the sincerity from me, that I'm like, look, there's two things. There's a business here, and then there's what you should do for you. Right? On the business level, it's like this, but for you, it's like that. And this other way is, these are the things that are going to stand in your way. Like, you might have gotten here through the fight, but the fight is over. Now you got to learn how to work as a team. And these are like radical shifts for people to really develop into, especially if they've been more sort of isolated creatively and have fought the hard way to come up.
Yep.
Not to belabor it too much.
No, that's very true. And personally, my biggest learning experience, something that inspired me to start this podcast as well, was a major failure in management. I was handed a young team with incredibly ridiculous goals on our plate from upper management, and to me it was doable, but to my team it was overwhelming, and I took it away from them and proceeded to just try to tackle it myself. And that's the worst thing to do in management. I was not leading them. I was not fighting for them. I was not speaking for them. But to me, my whole career, that's what you do. You get the work done. You crank it out. You do the best you can do. You stay competitive. That's how you, and you know what? It all came crashing down. That is not how you do it. And, so it was an incredibly valuable learning experience, but it speaks so true to what you just said,
Well, I've found it to be the case. I mean, it's that crash against the hard wall of humility of my own force. It's kind of like what you were describing is, my force is like approaching this like an Olympian athlete, and we can do it, right? And then you got a whole team of people that never really wanted to be Olympian athletes necessarily, and at the same time just are just trying to give a fair exchange for what they're getting paid for. Right, rather than being the team that really wants to go after that gold medal, and that's like, all those places are fair, but the more intense you are, like the more you step into the role as you were just describing it, then the more you kind of have that, we're going for the gold, and they're like, dude, we didn't really sign up for that. That can be one side of it. The other side is like, you're way too ambitious, and that's, we can't do it. So then you can completely overwhelm the whole carriage on the way, right? And wheels start breaking and people start falling off. But you're right. And so it's a very unintuitive lesson of how to manage properly, right? It's I mean, this is giving you an example. Doctors manage horribly. They think they're the brainiacs of the world. They go to the Ivy League, they get these degrees, they run practices, and they are terrible managers. I mean, they just humiliate the people. I mean, I see it all the time, and I've been dealing with some medical issues, and I'm constantly amazed at how sort of unprofessional some trades that involve so much gray matter, like surgery, and pharmaceuticals, have these people get zero training in management, so they don't really learn how to run teams. So they have offices that are dysfunctional,
right?
And then because they provide a service that's very valuable, they're able to skate it. They're able to sort of survive it because they're able to charge a premium in a way. If you and I go to the doctor's office, I'm just using this example, we don't ask how much is the MRI, right? We don't go get a bid on it, but everything else in life we do. So these guys get to charge these outrageous rates, and you just pay them, basically.
Right.
But that management is probably the hardest level.
Right. So on the topic of failures, Lorne, share with our audience, one of your biggest failures.
Well, I think it aligns to exactly a similar case of like what you're talking about. And I believe this is a curse of capitalism. because you were in a position, let me use your case first. You're in a position where management is saying, I want something unreasonable and I'm tasking you to do it, and it's your neck. And then you go home and you breathe deep and you suck it up and you go, okay, well, I don't have a choice. I'm going to do this. And then basically now you have command of the slaves, right? Go build a pyramid or something. And the higher we are up on the executive ladder, the more we understand how we have to play that game. We just have to deliver, or it's kind of gigs up. But the further we are down on that ladder, the deeper we are in the trench. As I said, we're just looking for fair exchange. And if we don't have management that's measuring our capability as individuals to come up with what our goals should be, versus let's just create a goal and then throw people out and tell them they have to achieve it. This is one of my biggest failures. And I think it's been my failure in game design specifically, because when I began, Abe's Odyssey was the first game I ever designed. And so it was very fortunate, that it went on and at release to sell like over 3 million units, which to us was great. But I didn't learn my lessons then. And I learned some of the wrong lessons. And I see this in characters like, to speak frankly, George Lucas, and James Cameron, where certainly they've had millions of lessons, but because they had so many successes early, they embraced a lot of the things that didn't make them better people, that didn't make them better directors, as sort of necessities to keep in their bag of tools for what it takes to get things done. And so success can reinforce your bad habits is a good way of putting it. Right. And the guys that are more interesting is I think the guys that have had significant failures. Steve Jobs was a lot more interesting after he got back at Apple. Right. Because he had, there was a lot of lessons there. And there's a number of stories like that across the board. For me, what happened was, it's kind of I attribute it not so much to industry practices, but capitalism practices, which is if you're borrowing money, you're getting out there, you're saying you're going to make a piece of hit-driven entertainment that's going to succeed. You're not going to lose people money. You put yourself on the line, and then every dollar you're over on that budget, another pound of flesh ultimately comes out of your hide, right? And what I was doing was I was creating for what I thought would be hits, and what I wasn't being wise enough about was I wasn't assessing really what was the capability of our team synergized. And so I would be way over designing. And Munch's Odyssey, I think, was the biggest reflection of this, where I was way over designing and just going, we must, it's kind of your story. We must get this done. And if I had to get in there and solve various problems in the trench, I would, personally. And this was not making me a better manager. This was not making me a better designer. But the pressures of the marketplace, when I felt like, shit, there's so much on this, the Xbox is launching this and that, the tools are in flux, all these problems, but we must. And so I was driving design down into a team that quite honestly and fairly was overloaded. I mean, it just wasn't rationally and objectively balanced. And it wasn't getting sign-offs, it wasn't getting, I knew how to pitch really well. I knew how to sell clients really well. I knew how to convince people who were investing that this is going to pay off for them and this will make an impact in the marketplace. But what I didn't know how to do as well was really listen to a team and be able to distinguish even though I don't want to hear it, even though I don't want to hear that block that someone's telling me as to why something might not be reasonable, my passion would get in the way and my fears of the marketplace would get in the way. So I'd be like, no, we have to have this. We have to have this. We can do it. We can do it. And the fact is, a lot of times we could do it, but it would be at the expense of your team at the end of the project, or you would burn people out, or, they just want to quit the industry,
Right.
And because I always thought kind of like, I call it, it's kind of macho. I'm like, I'll be there. I'll lock the doors. I'll be there as late. I'll work as just as hard. If I'm doing it, you can do it. It's sort of imposing all these personal commitments and disciplines onto people in irrational ways,
Right.
and not reasonable ways. And that led to, it led to compromised product. Now, I still get, fan mail from people about how much they love Munch and play with the kid, all these different things, but it didn't change our reflection of how well we did in the marketplace. I mean, releasing against Halo was not perfectly timed, right?
Right.
The Xbox launch, but that was a huge lesson. But at the time, I was blaming the teams. That's the
Right.
truth. And so waking up to that, in hindsight is I don't success, the success we were aiming for, had that happened, more bad habits and bad sort of policy tools would
Right.
have been ingrained in me. And fortunately they weren't. And I think today that helped. I mean, it reflects in the new title and how we tried to work more with what do we have to work with, what condition are we in, how do we get there. That was with new and tasty. It was trying to be a lot more rational through the process. And then Stranger was a reflection of that. Stranger's Wrath, which was a game we released on Xbox in 2005, was trying to get that discipline, but really I was still quite out of whack. I was being way too ambitious. And so it was after I stopped making games for a little while, just due to not wanting to deal with the business conditions of AAA publishing.
Mm-hmm.
But then it really started to dawn in on me, and I started some other ventures. I failed at them, and the failure of them, like, had I been regretful, it's those old simple psychological lessons in life. Had I been regretful, they would have been really toxic.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was able to stand back and go, look, you fail for a reason. What did you learn? Then these lessons started to become more and more and more clear. And then today, I think I'm a really good manager today, but it was one of the hardest lessons to learn. Next to business, like having gone to art school, we didn't go to Stanford and get a business degree.
Right.
We didn't come out with a Harvard MBA. I wish I had. It would have made so many other lessons easier. But because you're in the pursuit of wanting to improve yourself, and I think insecurity. I mean, all business leaders will tell you when you find your safe zone, you're dead.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't like to tell people be competitive with your peers. I am very competitive in that I want to make great work that stands out. I am not competitive where I do not want to create losers. I do not want to say we're going to destroy this company. When I hear people say that, what I see is a Class A asshole. What I see is the problems of the world. When I hear these new ventures starting up in Silicon Valley and they go, we're going to destroy that other company, what I hear is some asshole saying we're going to get 10,000 people laid off from their jobs. I mean, it's just sick. I think the overall system that we're in, but it's the system we have to deal with. So we don't have to. What we got to try and be is not sick ourselves.
Right.
And that I think is overall, that failure hurt so deeply. Like when you realize that you are the problem.
Right. That's a tough pill to swallow,
Yeah, it really is. And just real quick, but I've been, get a lot of friends and relationships in the industry, and at times, some people will get into some conditions and they go, hey, if you're available, maybe you can come down and help us out with this for a minute. We got a development that's kind of on the rocks and needs some steering. And usually what it is, is that it's usually the management.
Yep.
It's usually the people that hire you, and it's not what they want to hear. And this is where I feel fortunate as well, as though I've had the success where it doesn't matter that much to me. No one's paycheck is worth it so that I would lie to them. Mm-hmm. Or keep on doing something I know is wrong if I can't give them the honest advice. So I've afforded the position where I feel safer being honest with people.
Right.
And that's not, people talk about it all the time, but that is not something I advise you to always be in business, especially young and coming up. Like, what is honesty and what is proper is
Right.
two different things. But in being honest to people like that, I go, look, here's where it's backing up. It's backing up in some of your policies. It's backing up in some of your behaviors. This is the block. This is a tough one to swallow. But if you want to fix this, here's the antidote. Here's the problem. Yes, and management wants to typically identify the problem as deep as below them.
Right.
Right. And I think it's just a human tendency. It's parents, right? They don't want to. They want to go to the therapist to get because the kids are screwed up.
Well,
it's not because they're screwed up.
Everybody, it's fear. It's job security fear. Nobody wants to be the one at fault because they believe their head's going to roll and then they're going to lose their job.
Yeah.
And that's one of the dichotomies of being a leader or a manager is it's not about you. And yes, your head is the first to roll.
Yeah.
And those are big shoes a lot of people don't want to fill.
And it really gets to a word that I always resented, which was leadership. like leadership always felt, I was always an artist, right? I wasn't the
Right.
guy in the huddle on the football team. So I never liked sports really, motorcycles and stuff like that. Yeah, but not, it was never like the team frat guy ever.
Right.
And so I'd hear words like leadership, but I'd be like,
Right.
this business school terms, real leadership is like, you're Kubla Khan, and you're the first one in the front line chopping through the hordes. And I kind of had that perspective for a while. And if you come from New York, that's bankers are like that.
Yep.
Advertising is like that. But what I came to understand is leadership is critical and the most important. And I had that all polluted with basically, as an artist, having problems with authority.
Yeah.
And I think not many of us realize how deep our problems with authority are. And so that idea of leadership led me into positions where I had to recognize my failures, like we just talked about, and that being a big one. And then if we talk about leadership within that, so I'm identifying a major, break in my chassis that was not healthy. But to come back to, how do you assess really what are the resources available to you, and how do you, now this is the difference of a great designer from a good designer. A good designer shoots for the moon and has good ideas and stuff like that, but practically speaking, he's probably too ambitious. The great designer is the master of compromise.
Yeah.
This is what I tell film directors that want to, and I've been fortunate. I was with CAA for years, creative artist agency down in Hollywood, which represents, all the Stevens and the Toms in the film business, right? Whether it's Spielberg or Cruise, or they're the guys. They're the Death Star of Hollywood,
Right.
and so I got to meet lots of famous film directors and stuff like that. And everyone wants to build a game. I mean, I've never met anyone that did not want to build a game, including like Shirley MacLaine and Indian gurus, no shit. Like everyone wants to build a game.
Right.
But film directors, they're used to being auteurs. And they're used to being able to, basically be on the set. And if they got the time and the money and the budget, they just scream till they get what they want.
Right.
Games are not like that. Because games, just as an example, because games actually rely on full teams of people that stay together, project to project to project. They rely on companies, not on contractors.
Right.
The landscape has changed, but it absolutely only used to be this way, pretty much, where you don't have a team that's scaling up and down for a project. You have a team that stays with a company. And if you think about the developers as they grew through the 90s, you saw a lot more of that. Right now, they're like big, huge companies, and then we have an indie scene, but getting there, it made the cultural medium very differently between the two industries. So if you came in the games screaming your way, good luck on getting the code.
Right.
Right, because how easily you can get screwed in games by a team that doesn't like you.
Right.
And it's different from film, where they can just go, "You're fired," and another guy will be on that set tomorrow.
Mhm.
Not the same in games, right? You got code, software is a little different. And so what I tell the film directors is, look, this is not a medium of brilliance. This is a medium of compromise. And what's going to look brilliant is the people who figured out that compromise the best,
Right.
mastered that compromise. And that means, where are we? What resources do we have? What could we do? And how do we make that, a finely honed arrow that hits a mark that we see being able to, cut through and punch above and get visibility? How do we dial that as a, I used to look at game design kind of like munitions design, like arms dealing,
Right.
like we just need to convince the big nations that we have an atomic bomb, and then we'll get the deals, that we got that next stage weapon. And I think it is kind of thinking like that. But then you go, well, we're not the biggest arms dealer. We can't build the biggest bomb, but what can we build? What is the smart thing that we can build that really can hit the mark? And that's a discipline that I'm exercising more now in some new stuff that's starting up that we haven't talked about yet,
Right.
but
Right.
where I really hope to have learned that well.
Right. Well, Lauren, with that experience and that lesson, it's more about compromise. Was that your aha moment?
it, no, I think that was my brutal lesson, and it had to be beaten into me. So I thought I knew that entering, and I think that's why one of the reasons we succeeded, because I was a visual effects supervisor on theme park projects and things like that, before starting a game company. So I thought I was really like understanding how to get into these tight chips, but really I was relatively clueless. But compared to the film directors, I was like incredibly insightful and being disciplined about it.
Right.
But relative to someone who really understood their stock and trade as a game designer, I was pretty off course.
Uh-huh. So, Lauren, was there any particular moment in your career where that light bulb went off, that something clicked, and you finally, like the clouds parted, and you're like, "Holy cow! Okay, I get it." Can you bring us to a
Yeah,
moment where you had that?
yeah, it's kind of a trippy one, but quite literally. But here's what was going on. I got into CG in the 80s through aerospace because that was the only place that were hiring. So I got to see all the advanced weapon programs of SDI, Star Wars, and that may give me a slightly different outlook on the world. And then uh, I was like, wow, I was seeing $14 million simulators. I was seeing I was having a let's call it AHA 1.0 moment when I was going, the future, VR is Nintendo waiting to evolve. If you go back, SNES was the big thing of the day. It was actually NES was still the big thing of the day. And I was like, the future of home, like engage, these $14 million simulator, whether it's dogfighting in F-14s and MiGs or entire world battle simulations, these are going to wind up as home entertainment experiences. That was one aha moment, and I was beginning to I was searching for, where does the artist create and own property today, right? And that's a whole new like concept of like, just retaining control rights to the things that you create. Right. Is extremely challenging. I think at the end of the day, we're one of the few that without ultra mega success actually managed to do that, where we still own what we created and are able to sell that today. But the real aha moment came here. I was designing with another guy who now runs like Tencent worldwide development, Steve Gray. But this is back when we were both at Rhythm and Hughes, the visual effects company in Hollywood. And he was one of the most brilliant programmers I ever met. But together, I was sort of designing and he was writing a feature film resolution digital map painting system. And we're talking, 1990. So like Photoshop was just still, a thought and barely emerging. Right. And so this was 2K resolution, film grade software. And I started painting like things on my own to encourage him to do more work on the software. So I'm like, hey, Steve, I'm doing this painting, man, but you got to help me. I need this tool. And he was just great like that. And he was brilliant. And so I was working on these paintings, trying to think of like alternate businesses that I could start, limited edition prints, this and that, and, prehistoric seas painted photorealistically, like all these ideas I was running with. And I was sitting there one night looking at imagining one of these paintings, digital paintings that I was painting at like, 8,000 lines back in 1990 with a mouse, because there wasn't really Wacom's and stuff. Right. Is that I was imagining, I was sitting in my living room one night, and we had all been like hanging out and doing bong hits or whatever, right? So I'm sitting there afterwards, and I'm imagining this digital painting that I had made of an undersea plesiosaurus, which was kind of accurate, like almost trying to be scientifically accurate, and at the same time beautiful. And I was trying to print them out at like 8 feet, 10 feet, so there'd be big art, like museum scale art. And I was going through that process, and I'm imagining now that painting on the wall and like how it would be printed out. But then somehow this just came to me, sitting next to the painting on like a little shelf, and this is all just happening in my mind, is a joystick. And I remember asking myself, what the hell's a joystick doing there? Like this, writers will talk about this, that if you get deep enough into your characters will start saying things that surprise you. Uh-huh. That's like, you didn't think of them. The character told you that, and I've had this happen in writing where I'm like designing a scene and then all of a sudden the character does something that I just witnessed. And I go, why did they do that? And then it's like, oh, good screenwriters and good novelists will talk about this phenomena. So it's almost like your cast is becoming ghosts in your head, and then they start feeding you information that you swear you didn't come up with. Right. And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, what the hell is this joystick doing there on the shelf next to the painting? And in my mind, I pick it up and I realize the painting is moving. and that was my moment. It was like, why am I making still images? I mean, I was doing visual effects for film and stuff, but I was thinking about me as a creator, as a personal expression. I never, excuse me, I didn't think I'd be able to go out and get $120 million for a film budget. So you were basically doing the exercise for clients, whether it was networks or logos, TV commercials, scenes in a big movie. And I see this joystick and I touch it and I realize the painting is moving, and it's that boom moment where I went, there's no reason why I can't run all this interactively. And that was it for me. It's like that's it. I have to get into games now. Like I saw it happening, and I was studying enough of what was happening with technology because I had this conundrum as a creator, which was I love computer graphics. I mean, I was trained as a photorealist painter that taught me most importantly how to see.
Yeah.
Like that's really photorealism. I mean, there's an element of chemistry, but it's really the training of how to unsee what you think you're seeing, how to really see what's before your eyes. And that's what makes the great ones, right? So you learn how to sort of understand light and what you're actually looking at versus what you think you're looking at. And now that way of looking at things really helped everything else because it forced me to take a harder look at everything. Relationships. I was now looking at everything like photorealism. Like, do we really understand what's happening? Because it appears like one thing, but it's entirely another. And so I was looking at what's the speed of chipsets, how long before Nintendo type devices have CD-ROM capability where you could play back 3D graphics. Like I was trying to figure this all out, but it didn't really dawn on me the magnitude until I saw that controller sitting next to that painting in my mind. And I was just like,
mind.
that's it, boom. And that was 1991, and it took 3 years to then form Oddworld.
So that one dream or image in your mind led to Oddworld. I mean, just starting up your own game studio and trying to stay on the cutting edge of technology.
Yep.
So what were your two big objectives with Oddworld?
Well, I was looking at, my real hero at the moment. There was two, there was Lucas and Disney. And they were my heroes because they created properties that I loved, one as a younger person and the other as a sort of, maturing adolescent or immaturing adolescent. But, so Star Wars I found very inspiring, and I went through a lot of different challenges at life. If I said, I didn't think about jumping off the cliff a few times, I'd be lying. And in many ways, I felt like the philosophies in, Yoda's repertoire had kind of kept me off the cliff edge a few times. And I thought that was incredibly powerful. Now, I had also been a kid who learned how to read from the Muppets. So I learned how to read from television. It wasn't the Muppets, it was called Sesame Street.
Right.
But I learned how to read from television. I was like, how powerful that a guy with as my partner used to say, could have talking socks teach kids how to read. And I found the possibilities of medium really potent. And at the same time, films like Apocalypse Now, had really profound impact. You watch them once and you never forgot them. And I was looking like, where's that combination, And the novels I had read growing up, like Brave New World and 1984 and George Orwell's work, was like, could you make something, not only could you make something, and I was, when I was in college, I was still trying to paint guys with axes and, and dragons, and because that was just cool and macho, and then I'd meet real art critics and they'd be like, look, man, are you just impotent? Like, what are you talking about? They'd be like, that's nice. You're kind of here, kind of wanking to your own little fantasies and stuff. But isn't there a whole rest of the world of relevancy going on around you? Couldn't you use your power to actually, share some insight on something? You seem to have a lot of opinions. Do you have opinions about the world and all you draw is monsters? And it was like, those were aha moments as well. It was like, whoa. And they'd say, and I'd be trying to show, established, really famous painters, artists, my favorite in the world, trying to show them my portfolio back in the 80s, and I'd be talking all about technique and how I'm hoping to get better at this and that, and the best one, Jack Goldstein, said, he goes, hey man, you paint just fine, you just don't have any ideas. And that was like, oh, that was like a knife in the heart. That was the most valuable I ever got.
Right.
And that started making me realize that I could connect my passions with the world to to my craft. And before they were separate, craft was a means to survival, but I wasn't, and it was passion because I loved doing it, but I didn't realize that my deeper philosophical issues, fears of the world, concerns of the world could actually be more reflected through my art, like George Orwell had done, or even like Lucas had done with the original Star Wars, you know.
Right. No, I know. It's if we don't share our ideas or thoughts, it's just paint on paper, right? It's just a
Yeah.
pretty image. That's all you're
Yes.
making.
Yeah, and you know, and so when I was younger, I'd suddenly start looking at everything, you know, through sunglasses that are tinted with you know, a capital A for art, right? And then I'd get all judgmental about people who weren't doing that, which is completely off course as well.
Right.
Because in reality, it's like we're all in different places. We serve different purposes. You know, some people I'm envious of because they're willing to dedicate their time to work at the animal shelter. I just, you know, it just breaks my heart because, you know, they don't have high income, but they still do these great things in very simple ways. And really that helps our world be a better place. I used to have more of a highbrow judgment attitude where if you're not going for it like this, you know, it's crap or whatever, you know, assholeisms I had attached to it. But with time, it was like, you know, this goes to the management too, which is just because that guy doesn't want to take this all on his plate does not make him a bad guy.
Right.
But when you're in development, you're in the crunches of hell, you start having these, you know, deeper emotional dramas about different characters. And it's not characters in your cast of performers in your work team. And you start judging them differently. And as I was judging artists differently that weren't necessarily seeking the same degree of depth that I was. And really that was a mistake too. And what I have come to fall out on, I'm grateful as long as people are executing things that makes them happy. Like I really am. Like I think the world just needs to be a happier place.
Yeah.
And then there's, if you want to step it up, then there's other levels of degrees of critical analysis, you know. But you know, we can't judge the Little League the same as the Olympian.
Right. Yeah. So Lauren, with that story, I find it really fascinating that, you, as you said, you come from a background with no art. Are you mostly self-taught, or you went to art school,
No, I
correct?
went to art school. I went to school. Out of terror of being, you know, homeless and
Homeless
inadequate,
intention. Okay.
I pursued the best schools.
You pursue. Okay. Okay.
And so I went to School of Visual Arts in New York for illustration, which
Right.
at the time, by all measurement that I could find, that was the best school.
Okay.
And then after that, I went back to school at Cal Arts for animation and visual effects,
Oh, okay.
what they
Was
call motion graphics.
throughout your career was there any huge obstacle in pursuing, this creative career and passion that you've had, these visions?
Well, you know, I mean, obviously the obvious one is money,
Yeah.
right? So in the beginning, it was just paying for school. You know, my heart breaks for the debt that kids are suffering today with school bills. I mean, it was bad enough when I was a kid. So I graduated, I think I had $50,000 in debt. Uh, and and even those loans and scholarships, I got scholarships, but they weren't enough to pay for it. So it really took me to another level of, if I didn't want to work every weekend, every night, every opportunity to make money, I just wasn't going to succeed. I wasn't going to get a degree. I mean, I didn't care about the degree, but I wouldn't be able to finish something I had started that I cared about. And so the huge obstacle in that was the discipline to work hard, right? Like that was something. Like I liked to party when I was a kid. You know, I'd rather go out and try and get girls, get into trouble. That was a great time. I wasn't the kid sitting home on the PC. You know, I mean, we didn't have them
Right.
when I was in high school, but you know, it was so the developing that super hardcore discipline in and of itself just to make enough money to get past the tipping point where I could actually learn something of value to other people that they'd be willing to pay for. That was a big obstacle. And then I had another one in LA, which was, you know, you get to LA and, you know, I was like a thin kid. I was in good shape. I think I cleaned up pretty well, you know, I look squeaky clean, whatever. And, you know, you got into visual effects and everyone's like, you know, it's classic, you know, like game developers, you know,
Right.
everyone's slobs and they drink, you know, soda all night and, you know, and everyone's hair is fucked up, you know, there's no tan because they're always working, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm applying for places in LA and I felt like I couldn't get taken seriously because of the way I looked.
Huh.
And they'd ask me, I remember getting asked several times. It was like, so you just start acting? No, were you a model? And I'd be like, no, you know, like I was always really offended at that stuff.
Uh-huh.
And and to the point where I felt like I just wasn't being taken seriously. So I actually started wearing non-zoomed glasses, non-magnifying glasses. Like I started doing things to look more geeky.
Uh-huh.
And because at the time I was like coming up from nowhere, so I thought you tried to dress well, and I was overdoing it. Um, and so I felt like that was in my way. But the biggest thing in my way was those fears, because those fears would keep me in trenches that I could have evolved past sooner, but I didn't think I had the means or the power or the faith to actually believe I'd be successful, to take more chances early. And in fact, when people look at my career, they're like, shit, you started out well at 29, you took a lot of chances early.
Right.
But in hindsight, I don't think I did. I mean, I did, but there was so many others that even to this day, I sit back and wonder how much of what I'm calculating as a possible destiny here is shaped by fear and self-imposed limitations.
Hmm.
And I think those self-imposed limitations, like one being, I didn't bother pursuing being a film director because I didn't like the odds. I just didn't like the odds. I felt like it was being an actor. You were rolling the dice. You could be the greatest, but not succeed.
Right.
Meaning, the way that I saw how. I mean, if you're in Hollywood, really in the business, you see something that most people in the outside of the world don't see. You see all the failures.
Yeah.
And there are a million failures to every success, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And maybe that's an accurate ratio. Like it's just that bad, it's just constantly churning through people that don't make it. And those aren't the stories. Those aren't the stories anyone's reading in People magazine. Maybe they read the one about the guy who did make it and then didn't do anything with it. But the side of the freeway of entertainment is just littered with people that lost.
Mm-hmm.
And being someone, it's like, being someone who believes that pain and suffering and poverty is always just around the corner if you made a few wrong steps. And that's the way I was still looking at life. That put a number of blinders on of opportunities I didn't pursue because I didn't see it enough of the staging of it to be successful. And then I watch commencement addresses by people like what's his name, the comedian from Pet Detective, and it's embarrassing, I can't remember his name. The one of the biggest guys. You know who I mean, right?
Yeah. Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey, and he gave a talk about have no fear in pursuing your dreams. And I think it was a commencement speech, and it was like it makes you cry because he talks about had I been rational about it, I never would have been able to pursue comedy. Like who's going to support you pursuing comedy, And he would just go through how it really took that following the dream against all rationality that ultimately, today look at him.
Right.
And it wouldn't have happened had he not. And I think there, boom,
Right.
I don't know how many of those things I missed because I didn't pursue it.
Right. So Lorne, early on your fear was your fuel, right, to get out and get a job, to master craft and art.
Yeah.
But then later on, your fear was the same thing that was holding you back.
Yeah.
Later on. What are some personal habits or routines or tactics that you kind of use today or you applied to get over that fear?
Do
you have?
In the early day, I used to just go out like on a mountain type quite literally and just scream, just like because you have all this like built up anxieties, these fears and anxieties, and you swear it might all crash down on you, and you just get out there, yeah, I'm not going to let it be me, I'm going to win,
Right.
And you really do that. I would actually do that and I would feel better, and so part of that went with like working out. Like you work out to get rid of that stress that you're generating every day. The other one that works really well for me is you have to meditate, meaning, and that means a lot of different things. And I don't mean by anyone's, clinical way of approaching it with some, guru or something. I just mean in the morning, let me back out a little. When you're dealing, like right now, I'm probably dealing with 4 companies. That's crossing maybe 30 bodies of people that they're kind of intimately integrated, and that's a lot of moving parts every day. I mean, it's not. There's a lot of moving parts out there for people, but for me alone, sort of managing those connections on different continents, that at times real big problems can emerge. And what I find is that if I don't really set my center every morning, that it's very easy. It's much easier to throw me off of a good stable center point throughout the day. And what I mean by that is I remember a book that was written by a guy named John Lilly, who's the one who taught dolphin. He interfaced a lot with dolphins, and they made the movie about him, Day of the Dolphin, where the military stole his dolphins
Uh-huh.
to become like weapons. And but he was really, it's kind of a pioneer like Timothy Leary, hallucinogens and consciousness and, man-dolphin interfacing, and a big scientist in the 80s and 90s. And he wrote this book called In the Center of the Cyclone. And I remember I read it because I used to read self-help books and stuff. I mean, whatever it would do, how to be happy books, I used to read them. Like wherever I find positive nutrition, in nuggets, I was like all over it. And the Center of the Cyclone was very, to me, it was the image that helped me understand my own consciousness and my own dilemmas. And what he wrote about was, he said, using the cyclone, the hurricane, as the analogy of your state of mind, of your being, there's an eye. And in the eye of the hurricane is kind of when you're at your core, at your center. You're centered, and there everything is calm. But outside of that calm space, it's a hurricane, man. There's Volvos and trees flying through the air, right?
Right.
If you let yourself get out of your center, you will end up in the hurricane. And when you're in a hurricane, you can't see anything clearly because you're just dealing with the hurricane. It's all reactionary because you are now governed by a different force other than your own. And so what I do is I've been through some really whether it's big publisher issues, or whether it's employee issues, or whether it's all kinds of things, partners that are attacking each other, the worst things that happen in business. Going through those, I find that what I do is I try to I'll get up earlier, I'll spend more time, and I'll sit down in a shower that I just drizzle the rain really lightly. But for some reason, I can kind of relax in that space rather than trying to sit somewhere in a yoga position, with my mind with all these distractions. And in that space, I'll spend like an hour, and I'll just try and empty my head. But I can see now more objectively all these thoughts racing through my brain that are really running on all these CPUs that are going, and so many of them I can start to monitor. And I go, no. That's shitty thinking. That's all emotional driven, wrong answers. Right. So I can start to have clarity. I can start to see where I'm caught in a hurricane, and it brings me back closer to the center. And if I'm closer to the center, then I'm a much better leader and manager.
Right.
But if I'm not in the center, I'm a terrible leader and manager.
Right. Yeah, finding that center point, because that's really hard to do, is to really listen to the things you're telling yourself, right?
Yeah,
and catching all the BS and negative and fear. That's a lot of times we don't listen to the thoughts that are, that's
exactly.
So meditation, how early do you get up?
Sometimes it's like 6:30, 7:30, and then I might go back to bed later.
Yeah.
But I find it's critical. And I went through some experiences where there was some real sabotage, let's say. And so deep issues of feelings of betrayal, where you think you're in alignment with someone and you find out it's actually in opposition. And, it can be really detrimental to business. I mean, all kinds of negative causes and effects. But betrayal is a tough one, right? Because it really sinks in. The feeling of betrayal, I'm not saying it means you're right, that that's actually what happened. But when you're experiencing those feelings, those are the tough ones. Those are the ones that hit you. It's not just a problem to solve, but it's personal. You feel personally stupid for not seeing it coming, and then you feel personally resentful because it did happen. Like you go through all these waves. And what I found was the process I just told you. That's what helped me sail those experiences with grace. And not descend into, the same tactics that someone else was using.
Right. On a similar note, sometimes in heated meetings or discussions, and this often can be taken the wrong way, is I'll often tell, people I work with who are stressing out about issues at work or what have you, I'll say, hey, look, we're creating this, we're artists. It's not like we're saving lives here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But sometimes
Exactly.
but then they think you're like, demeaning their whole craft and what they're doing. And it's like, no, 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 I'm just trying to like
Yeah.
alleviate the stress.
Well, it's funny, it's funny you mention that because this is something I've given it. There's a number of the young guys, in the UK that have been working on this project, and it becomes overwhelming. I mean, if they care, they probably are working night and day and weekends, and really, they want to deliver a great job.
Mhm.
And but you're going through that process, and I go, and they got a spouse that's giving them difficulty, and you're in a position where you got to get it done. You don't have the leniencies that you had earlier. Like it's late, it's over budget, it's got to get done, but it costs enough. It's got to get done well, and that means no fun. Sorry, like here we are. But how do you deal with this? And what you're saying, like to the young guys, I often am telling them like, look, here's the cost of building entertainment. You wanted to make games, and I say this completely because I believe it. You wanted to make games, you wanted to make entertainment, but just to what you said, Sean, the world doesn't need this shit. The world needs houses. The world needs food. The world needs medical. It needs people picking up garbage, but it doesn't need us.
Right.
And so what we do is a luxury. And if you don't and if you don't appreciate that luxury and the cost that comes with it, the cost that comes with it is everyone wants to do what you do. You talk to the Ivy League today, all the kids coming in want to make games, whether it's the best film schools, whatever. That's why we have all these game programs starting up. It's because the schools are doing it reactionarily.
Mhm.
They have to, because everyone wants to get into games. So how fortunate is it for the people who are actually doing games? Because you're not doing anything that important. You're not saving anyone's life. You're not putting food on anyone's table. You're not curing their heart ailments. And the price that comes with that is we don't get to live life in a 9 to 5, trajectory, right? If you want to be a garbage man, you can have that life, but you're actually performing a service for society that the society needs. We are not. We are working in a luxury, and the price of that is we have to work harder to achieve it.
Right.
It's the irony, but it's also the reality.
Right.
And what I tell the young people is if that's not going to work for you, you need to get out because it's going to chew you up.
Yeah. Yep. All comes down to passion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Lauren, we need to wrap up soon, and so I just have a few more questions that we can just fire through really quick.
Okay.
One is, what is the best advice you ever received?
The best advice. This I think goes back to you don't have any ideas. You paint just fine. You just don't have any ideas. And that one-liner concretized everything for me. It was like the chasm between what you create and what it could mean to you and what your fuller potential is in broadcasting that message.
Mm-hmm.
And that whether it was advice or it was the cold dagger of truth, which is kind of the one and the same, I suspect, that single moment of that humbling was, I remember it almost daily.
Yep.
You had another one, which was one thing you're really excited about today.
Yes, that's just what I was going to get to.
Okay, sorry.
So go ahead. Dive in.
To me, it's VR.
VR.
So there's two things that join with that. One is the indie scene and how people are actually finding their own autonomy and success today, that they can directly get to the audience.
Uh-huh.
The other is in VR. There's a lot of problems coming. Think of it this way. It's the first consumer electronics device that if the software isn't good, you're going to have a headache and you might vomit.
Right.
Right. And that'll last for 5 hours after you've done the experience. So, there's a lot of challenges here. But one of the great things about that is I absolutely believe in the realm of VR, and there's a number of people building headsets and all, that you're at that precipice in history where 5 people who know what they're doing and do it well can do something better than 500 people being financed by a big company.
Yep.
And that doesn't come often, and that's something I hope to seize. I'm not able to talk about it yet, but we're in line to try and seize that, where we can come up with something that is that reflection of super simple and yet has big potential.
Right. Yeah. The everything's getting much smaller. The teams are getting smaller. The engines are getting cheaper to license. The playing field is becoming more even. Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and so it's there. But what it also means is, we
less
say, oh,
jobs.
this is, yeah, and more entrepreneurship. And as you engage entrepreneurship as the individual, then that means wider role responsibilities. So even like the little indie developer today who's going to be successful, they find that they have to manage their own PR campaigns, that they have to manage their own social networks, that they have to create their own marketing. So with opportunity and access to audience comes these additional responsibilities. It's there, but it's going to be more work for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. The artist is the new entrepreneur.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Exactly.
Lauren, do you have a resource or app that you're really excited about you want to share with our listeners? Something you
The
use?
the two. There's one that I'm really excited about now, which is I just picked up recently the Wacom Cintiq Companion, and that allows me to paint on screen
Mm-hmm.
mobilely, like it's basically like a huge iPad.
Mm-hmm.
And the app that goes with that, of course, is Photoshop. And those two combined, let's say Photoshop alone as a creator, I'm able to construct images really quickly. And I'll steal them from wherever because it's not going to be published. I'm just trying to communicate ideas as quickly as possible. If you worked for Electronic Arts, they'd call it a rip-o-matic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you can use film footage that you don't have the rights to. It's all about just communicating your ideas. Don't worry, the world's not going to see it. What are you trying to tell us?
Right.
And through Photoshop, I'm able to, with my history as a painter, I'm able to quickly construct ideas. And why I'm so excited about the Cintiq Companion is that it gives me the power. I've been painting on screen for years now, and I like that. I can do things really fast, but this gives me that power mobilely. So even as I'm traveling, I can actually keep one hand in development that becomes very difficult, right? But man, that means a lot to me because this is how I win projects. This is how I uh, com- convince people of ideas. This is how I get teams in alignment for what our production design is going to be. So to me, Photoshop is it's a very powerful tool. And usually I'm not using it for finished work. I'm using it for communicating ideas.
Communicating ideas. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many wonderful, cool tech tools coming out. I mean,
Yes.
the painting apps on the iPads like Procreate. There's, the styluses are now pressure sensitive for
Hmm.
iPads, and yeah, it's getting
Exactly.
really exciting. Um,
Yeah. And, that you can sit in an airport and get 2 hours of work done, 3 hours, 5 hours of work done.
mhm,
Unbelievable. And it's not like you're compromising quality.
right.
That the tools are that badass. It's incredible.
Yeah, I'm rarely on a desktop anymore. Always
Yeah.
on the go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So share with our audience one book. Give us one book that you would recommend reading.
Well, I think this goes to creative people, whether you're a writer or whoever, but the creative gene in us, right? And this book would be The Mission of Art by Alex Gray. And I don't know, you've seen his work because if you've ever seen a yoga poster somewhere, his work is always being used. It's where you see transparent bodies with sort of fire coming off them and skeletons and nervous systems and all this like the electrical human being. So he's a real famous, fine visionary artist, Alex Gray. Now the book The Mission of Art, what he does is he goes through history and he speaks to sort of the power of what art is capable of and the power of the individual creator and how he can influence time and history and culture. And to me that was like profoundly effective book because it helps you take your craft into a more sort of cosmic and cultural space where maybe you can make a difference. And here's what I believe humanity means well. I think there's all kinds of sabotage to humanity that lives on our planet daily. But in general, and having traveled the world, I really believe in people. And I think, given the means for the not, forced to starve for their meals and stuff, they would rather have a nicer time than not. They'd rather be better to other people than not. And this book really shed light on the possible powers of the artist through history. And I think that's really important. And I've turned a number of young people onto it, and they really got a lot out of it. So that's, to the creative community, I'd say, the mission of art.
That's great. I'll have to read that book. I from the mission of it and the synopsis you shared about it, it's no wonder why we don't have more art in schools, you know?
Yeah, well,
It,
it's a problem because it's critical thinking.
yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
want that.
They don't want that.
Critical thinking has been, having talked to people in Washington about the trends of the educational system, they don't want that. You get people that they don't want you going to war if you have populations that are actually thinking about this. They want you to be distracted by Coca-Cola and sports, and
Right.
just do what the hell you're told and support whoever we want you to bomb. And that's pretty much the case. So yeah.
Wow. So, before I ask my last question,
Yeah.
it's, I just want to thank you so much for all your knowledge. I mean, this is going to be one of my longest episodes, and I'm going to keep it as is. I'm not going to cut it down. There's just too much value in it. But my last question for you is, it's simple, but it's controversial.
Sure.
But there's no right or wrong
Sure.
answer. What is your definition of art?
Okay. So, in the continuum, someone making totem poles with a chainsaw, or is making art, right?
Right.
And then someone, George Orwell and Steven Spielberg with Munich or Schindler's List is making art. So that's the continuum, sort of the upper the wide boundaries of it. Me, the role of what I think is the artist's potential is in this, to me, is like the application I try to apply to myself, which is you have the power to basically get mind share. If you have the power to make a painting powerful enough, or a poem power enough, or an article power enough, or a game power enough that actually captures people's attention, then the next question that emerges in sort of high, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is why? Why are you doing this, and to what purpose? And then you step up in another role of, okay, I was able to do this and make nice war games or whatever, but why am I doing it? What do I really want to achieve? What do I think would make the world a better place? And so art is really a weapon of change, right? And so art is a weapon of revolution.
Mm.
And I mean this in terms of soft weapons. I mean, no one has to get hurt, right? But when we have, a lot of people didn't understand Orwell. I'm sorry. In the day, Andy Warhol, they didn't understand soup cans. But what he was saying is, you're living in such a superficial society that I'm showing you the absurdity of it all. I'm showing you how caught up we are in it that you can even think this is art today.
Yeah.
Like, there was brilliance to it, Or you look at another one who I think people don't understand is Picasso, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the later stuff that people collect and all these billionaires have in their house, it's mostly the bullshit Picasso work, right? It's not the important work. And the more you understand art history and fine art, then there's certain pieces that are important. There's certain periods that are important, and then the rest of it, they're basically milking the barnyard of cows that they created, right?
Right.
Picasso was looking at the landscape, and he was seeing industrialism. And what he was seeing was that people were being turned into gears of the machine. That's where the Cubism was coming out of. It was coming out of the hills in Spain and France, and around the Mediterranean. They were no longer the beautiful rolling hills. They were becoming boxes. They were becoming factories. Right. And so the shape of the landscape was getting more cubic because it was becoming more industrialized and manufactured. And so were the people inside. The inside people were no longer becoming the farmer in the field who, went through his days and picked what he could pick. Now he was just a in a wheel that had to turn that gear every 5 seconds or else he'd lose his job. So he was looking at the mechanization of that's what was creating the Cubism. It wasn't just like, oh, I think it'll be cool to start fucking drawing hills as boxes, and so when you look at that and you look at, wow, that's what he's expressing. And if you start to understand what he's expressing in that period of the day, it gives you a different outlook that might change the way you're looking at the world. That's, to me, the mission of art, and to the level I try to live up to is I hope to attain that, in my own definition.
Mm-hmm. If you don't have a perspective or an understanding where these artists were coming from and their time periods, there's no way you can appreciate what they did,
No, you can't.
Yeah.
I used to resent Elvis, I used to resent Marilyn Monroe. I'd be like, they're all overrated, until I understood the role at the time.
Yep.
And then I came to see it completely differently,
Right.
and have a much deeper appreciation. But
well,
there you go, Sean.
Yeah. Well, Lorne, do you have any final parting advice for our listeners?
Just like never. Oh, here's one of my greatest lessons: never give up. And I can give you a case if you have a minute.
Sure. Go ahead.
The case is this: we closed down our development studio in 2005 because we didn't like the AAA terms of publishing. And we felt like it was a debt and acquisition game rather than the reason I created all this, which was to tell stories and hopefully, nurture those characters through life the way Dr. Seuss and Jim Henson did. Like, why can't those things be compatible in the game business? Well, the primary reason is cost, right?
Uh-huh.
So so business gets in the way. But but it wasn't a reason we did it. So we shut down in 2005, and we were waiting for digital distribution and trying to bring our games up to par, so that we would actually, maybe be able to start selling them on a digitally distributed networks, which actually started happening around 2008, and that allowed us to start building some new games, which. Not new games, I'm sorry, to like basically get our old games converted to different systems, finally playing on PS3 when it was originally built for the Xbox, stuff like that. And what that enabled us to do was actually start earning some money where we could start self-investing into newer product. And we still haven't really done brand new product, but we remade new and tasty. And when we started remaking that, it was kind of a small effort. And at the time, financing has just gotten more and more difficult across the board on every spectrum. And I know this firsthand. I've heard more no's than almost anyone else I know. I've had my share of definitely. It's very interesting. We're not interested. And what that led. I'm sorry. I'm backing up. Help me out. I just skipped the beat because my thing showed up.
Oh, yeah. No, you're just saying it's harder and harder to find financing, and you should never give up because.
Right. And so in never giving up, thank you for that. Sorry to space on you. In never giving up, we found ourselves demonstrating the game at Eurogamer a couple of years ago. And because we were demonstrating it, all of a sudden Sony contacted us and said, hey, why don't you get it on a PS4? Here's some free kits. And we're like, is this Sony? That didn't make any sense compared to the Sony we had known historically. And just because we were building it, all these opportunities coming, and that led to us being on the stage at E3 for a year and a half ago for Sony's indie showcase, as they talked about it. And it led to the press being reinterested. It led to sort of a revigorating news blip of Oddworld again out there. And the huge lesson, I remember walking off stage at E3 and telling a friend who was there, I said, you know what the lesson in all this is? Because we got a great reception. I was floored. Is never stop building product. Just never stop creating. And if you don't, good things will happen. And if you do, it's over.
Right.
And it's not logical. It's something that takes faith, But that was just shown and proven to me again, in the last couple of years.
Yeah, just never throw in that towel. You never know.
Never, exactly. Never throw in the towel. Just don't give up.
Wow. Well, Lorne, you had some wonderful, wonderful stories today. Where can our audience find you?
Oddworld.com
Oddworld.
and Facebook.com. I have a Twitter, offhand, and I think it's at Lorne Lanning. But I hardly ever use it. I'm not a Twitter guy. Half of it just goes down to time and attention. Like, I have Facebook and I barely get to look at it. Mm-hmm. But, oddworld.com, we and Oddworld on Facebook is places where, anything we're doing will become visible.
Wow. Okay, great. Well, Lorne, you've been an incredible inspiration to me throughout my entire career. Oddworld was one of the inspirations for me to get into games. And I just want to thank you for everything you've done over the years, everything you created, everything you've started, and especially I want to wish you the best on your continued creative trek.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sean. It's great to be on here, and I love talking about this stuff, so I appreciate all the good questions. And, it's too bad we never got to hook up in Slow.
Well, maybe in Berkeley.
Yeah, exactly. Well, here I am. All right. It's great talking to you, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
If you enjoyed this episode, head over to the show notes page at creativetrek.com, where you'll find the links to the resources and insights mentioned today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Now go out and make your mark.